Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Hey, our connection this hour was made when a federal judge rejected a request from the Trump administration to lift a court order preventing it from using an 18th century wartime law to deport people without due process. The Trump administration has said that undocumented immigrants do not deserve due process if they are suspected to be gang members. A federal judge said this was not a legal way of handling deportation cases. In response, the president and his team are lashing out at the federal judiciary again. Stephen Miller called it a Marxist takeover, noting that there have already been 15 injunctions handed down by federal courts against this new presidential administration, more than the Biden administration had in 4 years. But some of the judges ruling against Trump are judges who have ruled in his favor in the past. Some have been appointed by Republican presidents. And now the Chief Justice of the United States has taken the extraordinary step of issuing a public statement rebuking a sitting president. Here's how that went down. Earlier this month, President Trump was angry that a judge was trying to halt the administration's efforts to send deportees to other countries via airplane. Trump said that this judge was, quote, a radical left lunatic of a judge, a troublemaker and agitator, end quote. Trump then called for that judge's impeachment. In response, Chief Justice John Roberts released a statement saying, quote, for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose, end quote. But that has hardly settled anything. Last night, House Speaker Mike Johnson floated the idea that Congress could just eliminate some federal courts. Let's listen to what Speaker Johnson said.
It's not what the founders intended. So there's a natural tension between the branches of the government, and we're working through that. The Judiciary Committee is looking at alternatives. One of the bills that I really like that's already been through committee was authored by Representative Darrell Issa, and that would limit the scope of federal injunctions, the ability of one individual judge to abuse the system in this way. And it would be, in my view, a dramatic improvement on that. So we'll be moving, I think, that piece of legislation and some others to address it because we have an Article I authority under the Constitution to do that. We do have authority over the federal courts, as you know. We can eliminate an entire district court. We have power funding over the courts and all these other things. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and Congress is going to act. So stay tuned for that. Thank you.
This hour, we sit down with a retired judge who warned us around Inauguration Day that one of his great concerns with this administration is that they might try to ignore the judiciary or undermine it or take control of it. My guest this hour is the Honorable Richard Dollinger, retired from the New York Court of Claims and among other benches. You were on a number of benches, Judge. Anyway, welcome back. Extraordinary times.
Extraordinary times is the definition of where we are. There's no question about it. Although I do have to say one thing. I want to comment on the Speaker's description of desperate times require desperate measures.
Sure, yep.
What is the desperate time that America faces right now? What is so desperate about America?
He's claiming that the judges are intervening in ways that are inappropriate consistently.
You mean the judges who are following the Constitution, fulfilling their oath as members of the judiciary? I'm astounded. I assume Mike Johnson has a law degree.
He's a constitutional lawyer.
Oh, he is. Well, I got news for you. From my point of view, he's not living up to the oath he took as a lawyer to defend the Constitution of the United States. And my view is that anybody who utters those kinds of phrases and goes after the judiciary is violating their oath as a lawyer and ought to either be disbarred or have their law degree taken away from them. That's all there is to it. They're abusing the system of law, which is the fundamental ingredient in America's democracy. And whether it's the Speaker, the President doesn't have a law degree, you can't do it. Whether it's the Vice President or the Attorney General who have law degrees, they are vile, in my opinion, when they make statements that say judges are doing desperate things by defending the Constitution. They are violating their duties as lawyers, period.
Let me ask you, though, Judge, what would it look like for Speaker Johnson's statement to be correct, what would the judiciary have to be doing for you as a citizen to say, the Speaker of the House is correct, the judiciary is out of control, something has to be done?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the power of the judiciary. I trace my allegiance to the judiciary to Marbury against Madison, 1803, the United States Supreme Court.
That's right.
John Marshall said, there's a law in this country, and we, the Supreme Court of the United States, we, in essence, get to decide what that law is. We will apply our Constitution. We are the Supreme Court, and we will decide what the law is. The legislature can pass it. The president can sign it. But once the law is in place, the president needs to execute it under the powers of the executive branch. But what it is and what it means and how it's applied, this rests with judges, independent judges who focus on the facts and the law, and whether that law comes from the Constitution or whether it comes from statute or whether it comes from common law. Judges are vested with that final power. It is the hallmark of our democracy that we have an independent branch that keeps its eyes on both other branches to make sure they're acting in fealty with our Constitution and with the laws that were passed pursuant to it.
Marbury versus Madison, 222 years ago, the esoteric part of that case was on an outgoing president, an incoming president, who gets to appoint a cabinet. But what it really established was that the Supreme Court was an equal branch of government, and it affirmed that in ways that, had that gone a different way, we might not have seen these equal branches of government. Well, we've got those, and over the years we've seen occasional times where you've got executives trying to ignore the courts. Andrew Jackson, the Trail of Tears. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've seen tragic outcomes when this has happened.
Correct.
But surely there is something that the judiciary could do, Rick, that would make you say, even for me as a retired judge, that's out of bounds.
Well, I think there are certainly things that the judiciary has done, Dred Scott among them, Plessy against Ferguson, the Lochner case, which overturned restrictions that the state of New York had imposed on workers. There are things that the court has done that I would find objectionable. But as a lawyer, I don't get to sit down and say, I'm not going to follow what the Supreme Court tells me. That's not within the realm of possibility. If I believe it's wrongly decided, my obligation is to go out and find other means to bring the issue back to the court and have them change their mind. They've done that before. They did it in Brown against the Board of Education when they overruled Plessy against Ferguson. So it can be done. But anyone who sits there and says, I'm not going to abide by the law, strikes at the heart of what America is all about. I always learned, and it's been part of my dogma as both a lawyer and a citizen, that we are not a nation of men. We are a nation of laws. Those laws are put in place either in our Constitution through constitutional change or through statute by elected representatives, both at the federal and the state level. I was in the state Senate for 10 years. I voted against a whole bunch of laws. But the mere fact that I voted against them, Evan, did not give me the power to say, I don't have to abide by them. I disagreed with them. But the minute they were passed, they were binding on me, even though I voted against it. And the point is, you get the opportunity to object to what you think law ought to be. But we have a process to put it in place. We have a process to amend the Constitution. We have a process to put judges on the court. Presidents appoint them. Federal bench, they have lifetime appointments. In the state courts, there are a process for election and appointment. This is the system we have. Dismantling it because lawyers in the current administration or anywhere else say we don't have to abide by what the judges tell us are eroding the cornerstone of American liberty.
I'm going to try this one more time, though, because I'm going to get a firm answer out of Rick. Here we go. I think that you would say the judiciary is out of bounds if judges were electioneering, if there was a judge who had a Josh Shapiro 2028 flag in his courtroom, if a judge had a MAGA flag in his courtroom, I think you would say if they won't change that behavior, we will find a way to either impeach the judge or shut down that court. And you would say that's out of bounds.
Correct. I would say that's out of bounds.
So there are some limits, but they're pretty extraordinary for you to get to the point where you think,
well, here's the thing. From my point of view, you have to separate a judge's ethical behavior from their court decisions. I have been critical of members of the Supreme Court of the United States for their ethical lapses. I have said publicly that taking large gifts from donors while you're hearing cases that will impact them is inappropriate ethically. I've said that having authorizing or permitting a biopic while you're still on the court that says flattering things about you is inappropriate ethically. But those are ethical issues to be resolved by the court system and possibly by impeachment. But I don't think you impeach someone because you disagree with them what the law is.
Right.
And I would never go down that path.
So your concerns about the president's call for impeachment of a judge line up with the Chief Justice. And I want to ask you about how extraordinary that is, because I'm just an observer here. I'm not a lawyer. I haven't worked in courts. But it is so unusual for justices on the U.S. Supreme Court to end up either intentionally or even inadvertently sort of caught up in politics. Of course, we can parse their decisions, the dissents, the majority opinions. You can read their words. But I mean, I remember, and producer Megan Mack will fact check me on this. I don't know if it was President Biden or President Obama, but there was a State of the Union in which I think it was Justice Alito, who mouthed the words "not true" to something that a Democratic president was saying. And, the justices are sitting there in the front row, and Alito is saying "not true." That was 2010. Okay, so way back in 2010, President Obama, and it was Justice Alito, is that right? Was that correct? It was Justice Alito? Yeah. So that was an extraordinary moment, Rick, because the justices are supposed to kind of, no matter who the president is, no matter what they're saying, they're not injecting themselves into politics. So when Alito mouthed the words "not true" in 2010, when President Obama was behind the lectern, that was a big story. 15 years later, Chief Justice Roberts issues a statement rebuking a sitting president. And what President Trump said in response was, well, he didn't mention me by name. He might not have been talking about me. Of course he was talking about President Trump. And I'm going to read the statement again. Chief Justice Roberts said, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose," end quote. How extraordinary is it to you to hear a Chief Justice interject like that?
I think it's historical. I really do. And I would point out, Evan, that there have been disputes between sitting presidents and members of the Supreme Court. Franklin Roosevelt, in his second term, tried to pack the court because they were undercutting the New Deal and the statutes that were passed in the New Deal, declaring that they were unconstitutional. Roosevelt came forward and said something somewhat similar to what Mike Johnson said, which is, we as Congress have the power to control the court, and what we're going to do is increase the number of judges on the court so that I can pack them with my friends and with my allies, political allies. So it's not unusual that there's a conflict between the executive branch and the judicial branch. The question that is, in my opinion, unprecedented, or the issue that's unprecedented, is that someone is suggesting we're going to impeach them because we disagree with them. In my opinion, that's the doorstep to totalitarianism. And I would just suggest, if you look at the history of, I'm going to cite a couple of places, maybe Megan can fact check me on this, but go to the Philippines, go to Venezuela, go to countries in which dictators have assumed power, and you will find that there are 2 things they do, or 3 things they do. They try to cut off lawyers' access to the courts. They try to remove judges and install their own allies. And 3, they try to prevent free speech. They try to cut off free speech by controlling the media and dictating its terms. I think anyone could reasonably look at what's going on in America today and reach the same conclusion.
Well, listeners, if you want to weigh in on what you're hearing here, it's 844-295-TALK. If you want to call the program, toll free, 844-295-8255, 263-WXXI if you're in Rochester, 263-9994. You can email the program, connections@wxxi.org, connections@wxxi.org. If you're watching on the WXXI News YouTube channel, you can join the chat right there on YouTube. I want to listen to a little bit more sound from various parties here. First of all, as we mentioned, the Trump team wanted to use the Alien Enemies Act to conduct deportations without legal review. And I want to listen to a clip. This is going to be Tom Homan talking about this. Homan is the newly appointed border czar for the Trump administration. Homan was talking in this clip to ABC's Jonathan Karl, who you will hear first. Karl wanted to understand whether this administration thinks that they can just put somebody on a plane to another country and put them in a prison in another country without a hearing, without a trial, without due process, and whether they think they have the right to do that. Let's listen to this exchange.
What we've heard from lawyers representing some of these people is that they deny that they're members of this gang, or either Tren de Aragua or MS-13. Do they get a chance to prove that before you take them out of the country and put them in to a notorious prison in a country that they're not even from? I mean, do they have any due process at all?
Confident. Look, due process. Where was Laken Riley's due process? Where were all these young women that were killed and raped by members of TDA? Where was their due process?
Tom Homan, the border czar, who is conducting a campaign of aggressive deportation, when asked whether people deserve due process before they are deported, essentially said no, they don't. Because when you have people like Laken Riley murdered or raped, in Homan's view, those American citizens had their, quote, due process violated. And so, therefore, the federal government need not follow a due process in seeking to deport. What do you make of that, Judge?
Well, it's collective injustice. You happen to be a member of a group, and someone in the group does something wrong, and then everybody assumes that everybody in the group has done something wrong. It's a complete denigration of the notion in the United States, which has been established forever, that we believe in individual justice, that every single person is entitled to due process. And if your argument is, I'm not a member of the gang and you can't prove that I am, you should have the ability to do that. Whoever this guy is, this Homan guy, where does he get the notion? Who proves to his satisfaction that they're all members of the gang? I mean, that's equivalent to saying, well, you speak Spanish, you must be a member of the gang. I think those kinds of generic stereotypes do not replace individual justice in America. And here's obviously the high-ranking czar who says, oh, we don't care about that. We care about pictures and publicity. What's going on here, in my opinion, Evan, is very simple. The deporters from Homan, from the president on down, will never get the numbers that they're suggesting. They will never deport 11 million people as they've once claimed.
Or 20 million.
20 million. Well, they'll never get to those numbers. But what they want to do is satisfy their base that they're doing something. So they have these pictures where they trot 60 people in front of the television cameras and say we're eliminating a gang, the same gang of which one member some prior time raped and killed somebody. An awful thing. That person, because of the notion of individual justice, that person should be prosecuted to the fullest. And from my point of view, I wouldn't send them back to Venezuela. I'd put them in a federal penitentiary for the rest of their lives.
But you're saying this looks like a Philippine system.
It does.
Not an American system.
But my point is, this is what you do. You make all these high public arrests and deportations by saying we're ridding America of the invasion of aliens. I don't believe it's going to happen. I think it's a public relations event, and quite frankly, we're just destroying the notion of individual accountability. What I find astounding is that you're a gang, you're Hispanic, and you hang out with people from Venezuela, you were assumed to be a member of the gang, therefore we're going to deport you. But if you happen to be on an email chain with talking about America's secret plans to bomb Yemen, and those plans are copied to a member of the Fourth Estate, then all of a sudden, we're not accountable. We're not accountable. This wasn't a big deal. We're not accountable. We haven't done anything wrong. The double standard it offends anyone who believes in the system of justice in America.
We're going to get back to that last part that the judge mentioned a little bit later here, but let me just stay on the thread of due process. There is momentum in some quarters for this idea that we have to be willing to bend on due process or break, because with this ambitious of a goal, 8 million, 11 million, 20 million deportations, it's just not realistic to adhere to due process. Here is Brian Kilmeade on Fox News making exactly that case.
I also think it's not practical to think that we can do due process on 8 million people.
No.
There's 22 million people here, a minimum illegal already just in the last 3 administrations. And there's some people that got through with Trump's administration. If we're going to give these guys a day in court and a lawyer, we can't do it. They don't deserve it. Our system doesn't need to be double burdened.
Okay, Judge, what do you think?
That comment violates the central position of American law, which is that everybody who's accused of a crime ought to have access to a lawyer. What he's suggesting is that people are here illegally. They committed a crime to get here. I actually agree with the notion that if you've committed a crime and you're here illegally, you can be subject to deportation. If, I included an important word there, Evan, if. And the if is, did you come here illegally? How did you get here? What are the circumstances under which you came here? And it seems to me that you need to have a concept of individual justice. It's fascinating to me. When the Capitol insurgency occurred, we gave everybody who stormed the Capitol, who was arrested, we gave them all due process. 1,300, 1,400 of them. We didn't deal with them as a collective group. We didn't say you're all guilty. We have pictures of you.
Didn't put them on a plane.
We didn't put them on a plane, but we didn't even send them to jail until we didn't punish them. The power of the government was not used to punish them until after they had extensive due process. And those were people, we had films of them beating up police officers, breaking the government's property, storming into the Capitol. They got full due process. All of a sudden, we're now saying to people, we think, who's the we? Who are the we that do this thinking? We think you're here illegally, and therefore you don't get due process. I'd love to meet the we. I got to find out who those we are.
David in San Francisco, first on the phone. Hi, David. Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you, Evan and Judge. Yeah, I had two different angles now. When that Kilmeade jerk came on with his line, he reminded me of, he's basically saying that justice is not cost effective, that it's too expensive to give them justice. And if I remember right, that's how Hitler used the technique to round everybody up and put them in concentration camps. So, yeah, watch out for that, the money angle on this, that it's not cost effective. But the issue of due process, if they're going to cry crocodile tears about someone who got injured or hurt or killed or maimed or whatever by this organized crime gang, and then they're going to deport them without any trial, they're denying the victims due process. They're denying the victims justice by removing their ability to either sue them or see to it that they get prosecuted for their crimes.
No, that's David. You know, that last point's very interesting, and I want to start there. Thank you for the phone call, David, listening on the WXXI mobile app in San Francisco. Judge Dollinger, what David is saying is, contrary to what Tom Homan, the border czar, says, it is not just saying that, well, someone was raped, someone was murdered, therefore their due process was taken away, therefore the federal government should not honor due process of anyone who's accused of that crime. What David is saying is we need due process so the victims can get a full accounting, and sometimes there are options to victims. Sometimes there are obviously criminal cases, sometimes there are civil cases, but simply putting someone on a plane and sending them away forever might actually deny victims due process.
Well, I agree with that notion that it may deny victims due process. But there's one other benefit of due process, Evan, and that is due process can instruct us on what we did wrong. If we interview everybody, if we put everybody under oath, if we produce evidence that people have manipulated our visa system or our border control system, we get evidence that it's either worked or it hasn't worked or how it's been evaded. And it seems to me if you're structuring a way to change America's immigration laws, you might want to know proof, have proof, not just speculation, not just the deportation czar's opinion, but you would have proof of how these individuals evaded our border protection system, our immigration system, and how they evaded detection in the United States for all these years. I think, as a public policy person, that would be enormously valuable to Republicans and Democrats and the President of the United States in the future, to have a whole army of litigation in which you'd gather all this evidence about how people got here illegally, and then we'd have the tools to figure out how to stop it.
Well, and I want to thank David for the phone call, a very smart set of points there. It leads me to a couple of other things that were on my mind. First of all, the team at the Bulwark has done a lot of reporting on some of these Tren de Aragua, I believe. That's the gang from Venezuela. The Bulwark has been reporting on who's actually been deported and what the evidence is. And it looks like there's at least one pretty prominent case where the government got the wrong person and put someone on a plane who's not involved at all. It's easy to believe that if there's 8 million or 11 million or 20 million deportations, they're going to get a lot of the wrong people. Just as, if you wonder, how did journalist Jeffrey Goldberg get added to this signal chain? His initials are JG. Well, there is a more conservative-leaning reporter named Jim Garrity from National Review who might have been who Mike Waltz wanted to invite. Maybe. Or there's someone with initials JG in the National Security Office who Mike Waltz wanted to invite. It might have been a mistake that he put a journalist or someone that nobody knew his number on the signal chat. And this is one of the most sensitive, what should be, in Secretary of Defense words, OPSEC is clean. Security is clean. It had to be for this, and it wasn't. They got it wrong for something that had to be perfect. You don't think they're going to get things wrong when there's 20 million people deported?
I think that the chance for errors, mistakes,
getting the wrong person
are overwhelming. And in the case of the gang, I don't know, maybe there's some identification with the gang. Maybe they hang out together. That may be an easy one for someone to figure out, there's a gang house and that you take everybody in the gang house. I don't know that. I'm not going to comment on that. But when what you're going to do is go into major cities and start grabbing people who are brown off the street, I think the chance for mistakes and, quite frankly, incredible violations of due process is rampant. I think those chances accelerate. I will be, believe me, as I've said before on this program, and several of my Democratic friends said, you got to be careful about this. I said if you came to the country illegally and violated our laws to get here, you should face deportation after a hearing, after you've had an opportunity to explain why you think you didn't violate the law. No one should presume that just because you're here and you speak Spanish, or because you're an African, or because you wear different clothes, or live in different places. No one under a system of law should assume that people have violated the law to be there.
Okay, Judge, I've got a flood of email that I got to get to in our second half hour. I want one more point with the judge before we take a break, and then we're going to get a bunch of your email. And then I've got some sound from President Trump that I want us all to hear as well. But, Judge, I'm trying, and I'm going to continue to do my best, this being what I hope will be the public square of our region, this program, I'm going to try to really consider and steelman all the best arguments in all directions.
Mm-hmm.
And last night I was listening to a conversation on a podcast that a conservative writer had. The conservative writer is someone who was pretty excited about DOGE, was pretty excited about efforts to create more efficiency in government. And here's how he described some of Elon Musk's approach and some of what appears to be the second Trump administration's approach. It's something like this. There's a lot of inefficiency. There's a lot of wasted resources, and there's a lot of crime and illegal immigration. If you want to be perfectly efficient and squeaky clean in every cut that you make, every deportation you make is by the letter, you could take weeks, months, or years. And what Elon Musk has demonstrated with his companies, like Starlink, like Tesla, like X, is that he will come in and he'll fire 80% of his staff. And then what he'll see is, where are we really hurting? And where we're hurting, I'm going to hire those people back. That's how you find out if there's pain. That if you cut something and you don't feel pain, then maybe that thing shouldn't have been there. And he's taken that approach to the federal government with USAID, with cuts to all kinds of different departments, with firing federal employees. Musk believes, with nuclear inspectors or people working in the nuclear chain of command, Musk believes, go ahead, make those cuts, and then you will figure out where the pain is, and then you hire back. But it's better to cut deep into the bone and then fix it than to be too careful. And that approach gets to immigration because this team is saying, as you heard from Brian Kilmeade, if we want to do the due process thing, it's going to take forever. There's too many people here illegally, and we're not doing due process. We're going to mass deport, and eventually we will figure out that we made mistakes, and then we will welcome those people back. But that's a better way to do it than to wait weeks, months, or years and to do it inefficiently. What do you think?
Elon Musk can do whatever he wants with his companies. I don't care. But in a country ruled by law, in a country in which a budget approved by the United States Congress, signed by the president into law, says that USAID has these functions, no one can come in and say, stop doing that. That's the law.
Stop due process.
Stop due process. Stop financing USAID. The United States Congress, in conjunction with the president, said we're going to finance it. Wait for the next budget to do it. They said we're going to finance the education department. You can't close it down unilaterally.
But they're saying the old rules didn't work.
No, but it's not a question of whether these are the old rules. These are our rules. They are still effective today. They are the principles under which we built this country. Due process, respect for individuals. We have established those. We are the beacon for the world on those principles. And now, all of a sudden, Elon Musk has said, we don't need to follow those. We're going to treat the government like a corporation that he owns or that Donald Trump owns. I got news for both of them. Neither of them owns this country. This country is owned by the people in this country. I just finished a lengthy law review article about the notion after the American Civil War about whether the states who seceded were still entitled to the protections of the Constitution, whether the people who live there. And the Supreme Court of the United States said, wait a second, they were Americans. They were always Americans. The fact that their state government chose to secede did not strip them of their rights as American citizens.
And you think that was the right call?
And I do.
Yeah.
Because the power in this country rests with the people. You can properly point that they elected Don Trump. They elected a Republican Congress. They elected a Republican Senate. I get all that. But that's the way it works. And until those organs of government decide those critical issues of whether there should be due process, I think that's a constitutional issue, whether the Department of Education should be closed, whether USAID should be defunded. Those are issues for our government, not for one person, and certainly not for a guy whose best skill I can see thus far is to wield the chainsaw, which has nothing to do with governing.
We're coming right back with your emails, and there are a lot, for retired Judge Rick Dollinger, who was saying with us about 2 months ago that one of his great concerns with this new administration was the erosion in respect and support for equal government and the judiciary. We're talking about where we are with that now. Your email's next.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from GreenSpark Solar, serving the greater Rochester and Finger Lakes regions for over 20 years. GreenSpark Solar is dedicated to helping people power their homes and businesses with local solar power and battery storage backup. More at greensparksolar.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. All right, your emails here. I'm going to read a couple to start because they are similar. Michael says, I hope you can get into what recourse a judge has if the president says he will not obey a judge's ruling. Again, that hasn't happened yet. President Trump and the vice president have floated the idea, as has Stephen Miller, one of their advisors, that they might not need to follow a judge's ruling. They might be able to ignore it. But we haven't seen that yet. But Michael is saying, well, if they do that, what is the recourse? And similar to that, D says, what can be done if Trump does not comply with a court order? Arrest him? Judge Dollinger?
Well, the power of the judiciary when someone fails to obey a court order is relatively simple. You hold them in contempt. The best example of that, and the one that comes to mind, so kind of jumps out of my brain at this point, involves Steve Bannon. Remember Steve Bannon? He, the president's advisor who refused to appear before Congress? And Congress went and got a court order that said this is a legitimate inquiry by Congress. You are now ordered to go appear before Congress. And he said, no, I won't. He went to jail. That's what we do. The power of the court to issue an order that says you have to do something cannot be contested, certainly if it comes from the United States Supreme Court. And the best example of that was the last time we faced a critical constitutional crisis between the judiciary and the executive branch, when the United States Supreme Court affirmed Judge Sirica's rule that said Richard Nixon had to turn over the tapes, and Nixon debated whether he had to follow the United States Supreme Court order.
But he did it.
He did. One of the reasons why he did it, whatever you think about Richard Nixon, he was a lawyer to his soul. He believed in the power of law. He wanted to change laws. He wanted to tinker with the law. He, at times, flirted with violating it. But he was a lawyer. He knew a lawyer's responsibility to follow a court order. J.D. Vance knows it. Pam Bondi knows it. They all know it if they've got law degrees. They were taught it within the first 2 weeks they sat in a chair in law school. And the bottom line is, you don't follow a court order, the judge instructs the federal marshals to arrest the person and bring him to the courthouse. Hold him in contempt.
Okay, Dallas says, Evan, are you going to get bored doing Orange Man bad shows anytime soon? This is not an Orange Man bad show, man. Like, first of all, people who voted for and support the president are very much welcome on this program. And on top of that, there is a endless amount of material right now to talk about. I'm almost overwhelmed by everything going on. This is an extraordinary time. You heard Mike Johnson say, the speaker said, desperate times. He called it desperate times in this country. This is not a normal set of circumstances. But Dallas says, maybe do a show about the breakdown in norms that prompts people to key cars and firebomb dealerships. He's talking about Tesla. I think that's a problem. I think protest Tesla dealerships all you want. I don't think any kind of violence is ever a good idea. Interesting that we're more concerned, Dallas is more concerned about Tesla than the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. But he also says, I guess I'll throw a whataboutism in and ask if anyone remembers Biden ignoring the Supreme Court regarding canceling student loans. Yes, Biden's statement about student loans in the Supreme Court was terrible. I mean, the idea that I don't like this decision, but I think it's outside what I think the law is, and I'm going to find a way around that. Now, if Biden had said, legislatively, we'll solve this because I don't like this ruling, but we have to abide by it, and so legislatively, let's see if we can address this in different ways, that's another kettle of fish. To say that the Supreme Court's wrong and, that you really don't feel like you've got to roll with that, yes, that's a problem. I'm grateful that wasn't a normal disposition of the Biden White House. But I thought, Dallas, we've talked about on this program, I think Rick feels the same way. Joe Biden's pardons at the end of his term carry a lot of danger, a lot of precedent that only further cements what I don't think was ever the intention of pardon power. And I'm not a lawyer.
I said that when I was here a couple months
That's
ago.
right.
I made it very clear that I did not agree with the pardons from Joe Biden. I have never agreed with Donald Trump's pardons. Apparently now they're virtually for sale, is what I have been told, and I think there's some evidence of that. But the bottom line is this. When Biden was faced with a Supreme Court who said you can't relieve student debt, you don't have the power to do that, Joe Biden didn't say, well, I'm going to do it anyway. Joe Biden said, I'm going to try to figure out another way to do it that conforms with the Constitution and the opinion of the Supreme Court. That, in my judgment, is exactly what should happen. America's tradition is simply this. The legislature or the executive takes a step. Those steps go to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, yes, you can do it, or says, no, you can't because of the following reasons. At that point, both the Congress and the president can try to figure out how to do it without violating the Constitution. That's the way the process works, and that's the way it should work. That's the way responsive government works. We tried to do it this way. We failed. We can do it some other way. That's what Joe Biden did. He did not say, I'm going to do it anyway, which I think is what we've heard from people in this administration, including the guy right at the top.
Yeah, this is...
It's different.
From SCOTUS blog, after the ruling, the Biden administration did not carry forward with the loan forgiveness program, but did try to relieve student loan debt in several other ways. One such effort aimed at expanding existing loan forgiveness programs for specific groups succeeded in canceling debt for 5 million borrowers. 2 other attempts were blocked by the courts.
I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
So the courts reviewed all of their
correct.
efforts.
That's exactly the way the system works. And the other thing I just want to add, Evan, you said it earlier. The current president is challenging norms. Don't use that word. That suggests that a norm is like something we create out of our imagination. It's like the Alice in Wonderland kind of view of the world. We're not talking about norms. We're talking about the United States Constitution. It is not a norm. It is the law of this land. Mm-hmm. We're talking about actions of Congress that are the law of this land, elected by our elected officials, the people we vote for. Do not get the sense. I don't care what they change about the norms of whether they're going to have sponsors for the Easter egg roll in the Rose Garden. That's a norm. But do not sit here and say, we're going to tinker with that big norm hanging over all of us they call the Constitution of the United States. It's not a norm. It's the rule of law, period.
Last thing on loan debt, just to clear this up. Here's what Biden tweeted after the Supreme Court's decision. He wrote, "The Supreme Court tried to block me from relieving student debt, but they didn't stop me. I have relieved student debt for over 5 million Americans. I'm going to keep going." Then what they did was they tried other routes based on the fact that the Supreme Court's decision said the mechanism you are using to relieve debt is not constitutional. So Biden said, okay, let's try a different mechanism. And those 2 ways, blocked by the courts. They did not go through. So anyway,
I'm all for that. I
don't love the rhetoric in his tweet. I have to say that.
But my point is the way that it works is just because the Supreme Court of the United States says you can't do it this way doesn't mean you can't try to do it some other way. I'm all for that. That's what creative legislation.
As long as you are willing
power.
to continue to abide by court decisions and let courts review your next way of doing it.
Correct, which ties in with John Roberts' statement.
Exactly.
Which is, you don't like it, appeal.
Yeah. Okay, Greg listening in San Diego next. Hey, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Good afternoon. the decision last summer by the Supreme Court to make a president free from any type of prosecution, that the president is immune, means that the president can set whatever norms, whatever the president says are the norms, would seem to be logical from that decision. I think is one of the biggest tragedies in this country's history, to say that one man can basically do whatever he wants. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I mean, Chief Justice Roberts wrote it, I think. So.
Well, and let me just add, this is, first of all, to my knowledge, the word immunity is never contained in the United States Constitution. It's never been there. I have no idea. I did not look at the opinion with great detail, but I don't get where we got from constitutional strict interpretation of the Constitution to the majority of the United States Supreme Court saying, well, it isn't in there, but we're going to put it in anyway. I don't get that. But here's the other thing that I want to follow up on the point that was made. The immunity doesn't just protect the president, because he's got unlimited pardon power, and his immunity says that so long as he's giving the pardons consistent with his power, which would be official acts, all the members that were on that signal chain, all of them, discussing in an open context America's military secrets, none of them ever have to worry about anything, because they will be pardoned by the president if anybody says they broke the law. And let me just add, I have been critical of the pardons of Ronald Reagan. He pardoned Cap Weinberger and all the guys involved in the Iran-Contra. I've been critical of the Bill Clinton escapade. Yeah. That was awful. Yeah. Clinton gave 1,000 pardons at the very end. I've been critical of the Biden pardon, but the preemptive pardons that Biden granted, and I'm enormously critical of what Trump has done. The suggestion is that there are people in the United States who are favored by the president who do not have to comply with our laws. That is, in my opinion, the greatest threat to our democracy ever.
Judge, we got to move really fast now.
Sorry.
No apologies, because we have a lot to fit in. Pete in the Finger Lakes, got to be tight. Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, Rick, being a lawyer and a retired judge, I'm sure you're familiar with U.S. code. Specific code I'm talking about is 28 U.S.C. 3002 15A, which defines the United States as a federal corporation. So the idea that the government is not a corporation or is being run like a corporation, and we are misled into thinking the country that was founded as a republic and is proclaimed to be a democracy is a corporation.
Here's the bottom line, Pete. I'll be blunt. That is something expressed by the will of Congress. It's inconsistent with the decisions of the United States Supreme Court, and to that extent, the Supreme Court, I think, would simply say, pick a case, any one of the cases in the post-Civil War period that talked about America as a republic of individuals. The same language that was used by Abraham Lincoln, by the people, for the people, and of the people. It's a nation of people, and someone suggests that it's a corporation. Congress can describe it as that, but the Constitution says otherwise.
Okay, go ahead, Pete.
But the lawyers and the judges are operating the courts under U.S. code.
I assume they are. I don't know that. I'm not familiar with that section of the code. I'm just telling you that the Constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court for 225 years, says we're a nation of individuals. Yeah. We're the people.
I think most people don't think that the federal government is like Walmart, but regardless, Pete, can you sum up in like 20 seconds, because we're going to lose time. Can you sum up the point here?
The point is that these courts are being run as Admiralty Maritime courts, not common law courts. There is a difference.
There is a difference, but they're being run, interestingly enough, partly by common law courts, and partly they've become statute and constitutional courts. It gets very complicated. That's why you go to law school.
I want to say, I've got a minute left here, Pete. Will you email me separately, edawson@wxxi.org? I just want to make sure I fully understand your points about this at length here, and I will send you a note back, and maybe that's a good basis for a future conversation. We're going to lose time here. The last comment comes from Jen. Jen says, what options do we have when the House and Senate are turning a blind eye to executive violations? Congress has the power of the purse, but if Congress doesn't assert that power, can the executive branch get away with controlling these powers of Congress? I think yes, Rick. I think if Congress doesn't want to exert its power and wants to give it to the executive, that's effectively what happens, isn't it?
There's no question that whenever there's a vacuum and Congress is not asserting itself, the president using executive power is going to step in. That's exactly what's happening here. The Republicans who control the Congress appear to be at least in lockstep with the president about these ventures. And I think they're all, I'm going to use a kind word here, Evan. I think they're all cautious.
Cautious. Hey, you hear the music, so this is a borderline yes or no. Impossible with Rick Dollinger. But you said one of your big concerns is the White House explicitly ignoring a court order, a court decision. They haven't done that yet. So are you at least comfortable that we're still within the bounds here of law?
We're on the edge. We've moved the envelope right to the edge.
Thanks for being here. Come back sometime soon.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
Retired Judge Rick Dollinger joining us this hour. Listeners, we got a lot of your emails I couldn't even get to. I really tried to get through a lot, but keep them coming, and we'll have a lot more to talk about on this very soon. And more Connections coming up.
management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.